Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the How to Make Any Game Mechanics series. If you're new to the series, in each episode we randomly choose a viewer's game mechanic suggestion, and then I just try and recreate it in real time. As a disclaimer, because everything is done in real time, it may not be the greatest method to create this mechanic, so don't take this as the end-all be-all of implementations. With that being said, if you're following along and run into any hiccups along the way, there's a link to the GitHub for this project which contains each and every episode in the description box below. So it is that time again. We have just spun the Wheel of Pain, and today's suggestion comes from Nianti. They commented, "Thank you for this superb video. How about a stamina endurance system for running, for example, for the next video?" Well, thank you so much for the suggestion. I promise you I will try my best, and hopefully the end result is close to what you envisioned. So now that we have our suggestion, let's head on over to Unity. Inside of Unity, I created a new folder called Episode 12 Stamina System and a new scene called Episode 12. We are then going to do the most important thing, and that is change the background from this nasty blue color. So let's click on our main camera, navigate to background type, and change it from skybox to solid color. I'm going to go ahead and choose a dark gray type color, and then we can exit out of the background, and our background is changed. The next thing we can do is create our player. So let's right click, 2D object, sprite, and let's make a square. We can then click on our square and add a box collider 2D. So box collider 2D. And then let's duplicate our square. Let's rename it to ground. Reset the transform. And then let's scale it and move it into place. So something like that. Let's then click on our player. Maybe just rename it to player. And we can also reset that transform. And then let's add a rigid body 2D component. So rigid body 2D. And we're also going to add a player controller. This player controller was made in the very first episode of the series, so if you're interested in how it works, head on over to there. What we're going to do for our player controller is use transform movement and change the move speed to 3. I'm then going to go ahead and just hit play and make sure everything is working as expected. So the player should fall, and then we can move around on our ground. So everything is working as I expected it to. So I'm just going to exit out of runtime, and we can now work on our stamina system. So let's right click on our project and let's create a new C# script, and we can just call this, I don't know, something like sprint controller. And when your new script is created, let's open that up in VS Code. I am inside VS Code, and as per suggestion, we are going to be creating our sprint controller. The sprint controller is supposed to work off of a stamina system, so let's just go ahead and start filling out some variables that we know we're going to need. The first thing we're going to need is probably some sort of current and max stamina, so let's make some serialized fields. And let's make a private float current stamina. We can then do the exact same thing and make our max stamina. So let's make another serialized field and make a private float max stamina. We're then probably going to want to change the speed so our sprint can actually make us go faster. And to do that, let's just keep track of two variables, a sprint speed and a walk speed. I know we set a speed in our player controller, but we're probably just going to override that. Let's go ahead and make some serialized fields. So serialized field, and let's make a private, and I'm just going to use an int for this, so int sprint speed, and we can do the same thing for our walk speed. So serialized field, private int walk speed. Hopefully everything makes sense so far. We're also going to go ahead and we're going to make a boolean, and we're going to use that to keep track if we are sprinting or not. So let's make another serialized field, and let's make a private bool, and we can just call it is sprinting. Something else that we are going to need is probably something pretty obvious, and that is a reference to our player controller, so we can end up changing that move speed. So let's go ahead and create a private player controller, and let's just call it player controller. So with our player controller variable made, let's go ahead and in start, let's just get the component. So the player controller is going to be equal to GameObject.getComponent, and we're going to be getting the player controller. Inside of update, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start getting our inputs. The first input we're going to need is our x input, so let's make a float x, and that's going to be equal to input.get axis, and we're going to be getting the horizontal axis, so horizontal. We can then get input for our sprint button, so let's make sure we make an if statement. And then inside, we're going to do input.get key down, and let's check the left shift button. So key code dot left shift. To initiate a sprint, we're also just going to make sure that our x input is not equal to 0. So and x is not equal to 0. And this will just make sure that our stamina doesn't drain if we are not actively running. So inside our if statement, all we're going to do is just do another check, and we're just going to check if our current stamina is greater than 0. So if we have stamina to spare, we are now going to be sprinting. So is sprinting is going to be equal to true. We can then do pretty much the exact same thing, but for not sprinting. So let's make another if statement. And inside the brackets, we're going to get our input. So input.get key, and we're going to use key up to check if the key is released. And inside, we're going to check the key code dot left shift. So when you release the button, we are no longer sprinting. So is sprinting is equal to false. From here, let's go ahead and start setting up our stamina drain. For this, I'm going to be using fixed update as it is not frame dependent. That means regardless of what your FPS is, the stamina should drain at a consistent rate. So let's make a fixed update. So fixed update. And inside, all we're going to be doing is just comparing our is sprinting boolean. So let's say if is sprinting is equal to true, and our current stamina is greater than 0. So if we are actively sprinting, we're going to want to reduce our stamina. And then we're going to make an else if, so else if. So if we are not currently sprinting and our stamina is not greater than 0, we're going to be checking if our current stamina is less than or equal to our max stamina, so that we don't go over our max stamina. And then we're just going to increase our stamina. So basically, it just makes sure our current stamina cannot drop below 0, and that our current stamina cannot exceed our max stamina. From here, we can go ahead and start reducing and increasing the stamina value. So our current stamina is going to be minus equal, let's use time dot fixed delta time. We can then do the exact same thing for our increased stamina. So I'm just going to copy and then paste this. And instead of minus equals, we're going to be using plus equals. For your game, you may want to change the stamina drain rate and the stamina regen rate. So something like making your stamina last a long time, but when you're no longer sprinting, making it quickly recoup itself so you can sprint in a shorter period of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some variables for that. So let's scroll up to the top of our script, and right under our sprint and walk speed, we can go ahead and make some more variables. So let's make a serialized field, and let's make a private float stamina drain rate, and we can make another serialized field, and we can make a private float stamina recover rate. And then let's go back down to our stamina drain and recover logic. And all we're going to do is encase our time.fixedDeltaTime in some brackets here, just like this. And we're just going to say plus stamina drain rate, because this is for our stamina draining. We can then just copy basically the exact same logic and just put some brackets around this time.fixedDeltaTime, just like so. And we can say plus stamina recover rate. Then in our inspector, we can set these values and we can have more fine-tuned control over our stamina recovering and our stamina draining. We are missing just one more piece of logic to make sure that when we have no stamina, we are no longer sprinting. So what we're going to do is inside this if statement, we're going to make yet another if statement. And inside the brackets, we're going to say current stamina is less than or equal to 0. So if you've run out of stamina, is sprinting is equal to false. So when you run out of stamina, you are no longer sprinting. That should be all of the logic for our stamina and sprinting system, except for one thing. You might have noticed that we did not set the speed of our player. That's okay for now. I'm just going to save it up and let's head back into Unity to see exactly what we have so far. So back in Unity, I'm going to click on our player and let's scroll down and let's give him a sprint controller. Inside our sprint controller, we have a bunch of different variables. I'm going to make our current stamina something like, I don't know, let's go 5. And let's make our max stamina 5 as well. We can then change our sprint speed to be something like 5 and our walk speed to be something like 3. For our stamina drain rate, we're actually going to need a pretty small number. So something like 0.0, I don't know, let's go to 5. And for our stamina recovery rate, we can go 0.05. We can then hit play and watch our current stamina drain, and it should return back to the max stamina number. Let's go ahead and let's hit play. And the character has fallen, and we have our script just off to the side here. So when I move to the right and move to the left, nothing happens, but if I hold left shift, you can see the current stamina is draining. What you might have noticed is the is sprinting unchecked all by itself and the current stamina regened on its own. And this is just a neat little feature inside our logic, so that when the moment you hit 0 stamina, you are no longer going to be sprinting. And in order to engage in a sprint again, you're going to have to hit that left shift button again. By doing it this way, this solves the problem of sprinting, and then all of a sudden you run out of stamina, but you're still holding the sprint button, so then it just tries to play catch up. Every time you get a little bit of stamina, it just tries to move you a little bit quicker for like half a second. If you're creating a stamina system or a sprint system on your own, this is more than likely one of the issues you're going to be facing. I think this neat little toggle is just a better solution, and it's something akin to what you'll see in most games, like let's just say Fortnite for example. Anyways, the sprint controller is working just as intended, and the only thing left to do is actually change our speed. So let's go ahead and let's uncheck play. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to open up our player controller script. I am in our player controller script, and the reason we had to open our player controller is because our move speed is private, as you can see right here. What we're going to do is instead of changing any of this logic, we're just going to extend it and add one additional function. Let's make a public function, so public void, and let's call it set move speed. All this function is going to do is just going to override this private variable. So inside the brackets, we're going to want to make sure we can pass in a value. Let's pass in an int value, and let's just call it underscore move speed. And then inside our function, all we need to do is we just need to make sure we set move speed equal to underscore move speed. And that's it. That's all we needed to do inside our player controller. Let's head back over to our sprint controller and make use of this function. So back inside our sprint controller, let's just scroll up to update and let's add in some additional if statements. So let's make an if statement, and inside the brackets, we're going to check our is sprinting boolean if it is true. And then inside, we are going to say player controller dot set move speed. And inside, we're going to put it to our sprint speed. We can then drop down a line and make an else statement. And inside our else statement, we're going to do the exact same thing. So player controller dot set move speed, and we're just going to set it to our walk speed. And that's it. That should cover our sprinting. We're just going to want to do one more little thing, and let's scroll up to our start method. And for our player controller, let's say player controller dot set move speed, and we're just going to default our move speed to our walk speed. Just a little detail, but it makes sure that the sprint controller overrides the player controller right from the get-go. So now that our player should be sprinting, let's save this up and let's head back into Unity. I am back in Unity and there's no extra setup needed. We can just go ahead and hit play and we should be able to sprint. And my character falls, and now I can walk around and I can sprint. And eventually I stop because I run out of stamina, but then I can just go ahead and sprint again. There is no indication of my stamina whatsoever unless we scroll down and just take a look at this value. So let's go ahead and create a stamina bar. So let's uncheck play, and let's go ahead and create our stamina bar. We're going to be using a slider for this example, so let's right click and let's create a UI slider. And then you can see this slider is absolutely massive. I'm just going to click on the canvas and hit F, and this is just going to focus on the canvas, and I'm going to change the render mode from screen space to world space. I'm going to want this slider to be moving around with our player, so that's why we're going to be using world space. We can then click on our slider and just kind of move it to the middle of the screen and just scale it way up. The next thing we can do is make sure we uncheck this interactable button so we don't move the slider inside the game. And then we can open up our slider, go to the handle fill area, open that up and click on the handle. All we're going to want to do is just make sure we disable the handle, and then we can click on our slider and we can play around with the value and watch the slider go up and down. You can see there's just a little bit of a gap right here, and if you have the exact same problem, go into your fill area, and where it says right 15, change that value to 5. You can then see it butts up just nicely, and we no longer have that missing piece. Let's go ahead and click on our slider once more, and then when we adjust the value, we're going to run into one more little problem, and that is this value is at 0, but there's still a little bit of fill in our slider. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click on our canvas, make a UI image, and for our image, we're going to rename it to, I don't know, let's just call it stamina bar. And all we're going to do is we're just going to scale this image so it roughly covers our slider, so something like that. And I'm going to use this little rectangle tool and just fill in the back half. Now this little tiny piece is completely left out. We're then going to make the slider a child of our stamina bar, and then click on the stamina bar, and we're going to add a component, and we're going to add a mask component. You can see the stamina bar is cut off exactly how we wanted it. The next thing we're going to do is just uncheck this show mask graphic checkbox, and voila, the slider is now cut off.
Wow.
The very last thing I like to do for my sliders is get rid of the image it has by default. So let's click on our background and let's change our background source image from background to none. I'm then going to change the color of our source image to be something like a dark gray. And then we can change our fill area as well. So let's open that up, click on our fill area, and let's remove the sprite. And then I'm going to change the color to be green, nice and stamina colored. I'm going to go ahead and keep that value all the way up to 1. And the last thing we can do is just move our canvas into place. So with the canvas selected, let's select our scale tool and just scale it way down. You can kind of see the entire scene way down there, so you just know that this thing is massive. I just scaled it down to what I think is probably right. Moving it into place, I know it's just a little speck at the moment, but if we hit F, it zooms right in and it's still pretty big. So let's go ahead and just continue to scale it down. So something like that will be fine. I'm just going to make sure that this is somewhat centered on my player, so something like that. I'm just eyeballing it, and then I'm moving it below the player, and I'm going to make it a child of the player. So now that our stamina bar is completely set up, just the way we like it, let's go ahead and open up our sprint controller in VS Code and make it actually reflect our stamina value. I am in our sprint controller, and let's go ahead to the very top of our script and let's add a using statement. So using Unity engine .ui, and this is going to give you access to all of the UI functions inside of Unity. We can then go ahead and we can create another serialized field right below our sprinting, and this is going to be for our sliders. So serialized field, private slider, And let's just call this stamina bar. So let's scroll down to our start method and let's set the default values of our stamina bar. So the stamina bar dot value is going to be equal to current stamina. We're then going to say stamina bar dot max value is equal to max stamina. Last but not least, we're going to want to make sure our stamina bar updates. So what we're going to do is scroll down to update, and at the very bottom of our update function, let's say stamina bar dot value is equal to current stamina. And that's it. Everything should now work flawlessly. Let's save this up and let's head back into Unity. I am back in Unity and let's click on our player. Let's scroll down to our sprint controller and let's drag our stamina bar slider into the slider slot. So I'm just going to click on the slider and just drag and drop it into the slot. Let's then go ahead and hit play. My character falls, I can move around, and when I hold shift, the stamina drains and I sprint, and then I stop sprinting and I walk as normal. So let's do that again, and you can see it recovers, and then again, and it's going to work as many times as needed. But that's all the time we have for this episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and if you have a suggestion for a future video, I'd love to hear it. I hope you learned a thing or two. Thanks for staying to the end, and I'll see you guys next time.